The auction block smelled of tobacco and desperation, and Adelaide Owens stood upon it with her chin held high, though her hands trembled beneath the rough fabric of her only remaining good dress. The saloon in Downeyville, California, had seen many transactions over the years since gold fever first struck these hills back in 1849, but this particular sale in the summer of 1878 drew a crowd that pressed against the bar and spilled out onto the dusty street. Her brother Thomas sat slumped in the corner, his face buried in his hands, unable to watch what his foolishness had wrought. $3,000 he had lost at the poker tables to Samuel Garrett, the most ruthless businessman in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and when Thomas could not pay, Garrett had made his alternative payment terms brutally clear. Adelaide was 22 years old, auburn-haired and green-eyed, with the kind of strong-boned beauty that came from pioneer stock. Her parents had died 2 winters past from influenza, leaving her and Thomas alone with their small farm outside town. Thomas was 25 and should have been the man of the family, but whiskey and cards had stolen whatever sense their father had tried to instill in him. Now, Adelaide stood on display like a mare at auction, and she hated her brother with a fury that burned hotter than the afternoon sun beating through the saloon windows. Garrett stood beside her, his silk vest straining over his considerable belly as he addressed the crowd. "Gentlemen, you see before you a woman of good breeding and strong constitution. She can cook, clean, sew, and work a farm. The bidding starts at $3,000, the amount owed to me by her worthless brother. Who will start?" Adelaide forced herself to breathe slowly. She had worn her mother's dress, the blue calico with tiny white flowers, because she wanted to remember who she had been before this moment. Whatever came next, whoever bought her like cattle, she would survive it. She had survived too much already to break now. "3,000," called a voice from near the door. Adelaide's gaze swept across the room and landed on the man who had spoken. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty trail clothes, leather chaps over worn denim, and a black hat that shadowed his angular face. A gun belt hung low on his hips, and everything about him spoke of a man who lived by his own rules. "We have 3,000 from the gentleman in black," Garrett announced, his piggy eyes gleaming. "Do I hear 3,500? 3,500, countered an older man in a fine suit. Adelaide recognized him as Henry Whitmore, who owned the largest cattle operation in 3 counties. He had buried 2 wives already and was known for working his ranch hands near to death. The tall stranger's jaw tightened. 4,000. A murmur ran through the crowd. $4,000 was more money than most men in Downeyville would see in 5 years. Adelaide studied the stranger more carefully, trying to understand what would possess a man to bid so high. He did not look wealthy, though his bearing suggested quiet confidence. His boots were scuffed but well made, his gun well oiled and clearly used. 4,500, Whitmore shot back, irritation creeping into his voice. The stranger's eyes never left Adelaide's face. In his gaze she saw something she had not expected. Respect. Not the leering assessment of the other men in the room, but something resembling human decency. It gave her courage to keep her shoulders straight and her expression composed. $5,000, the stranger said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent saloon. Garrett's eyes widened with greed. 5,000 from the gentleman in black. Do I hear 5,500? Whitmore scowled and shook his head. 5,000 was beyond even his willingness to spend on female property, no matter how comely. The crowd waited, but no other bidders emerged. Working men could not compete with such sums, and the few other wealthy men in attendance apparently decided Adelaide was not worth bankrupting themselves. "Going once," Garrett intoned. "Going twice, sold to the gentleman in black for $5,000. Adelaide felt her stomach drop, even as relief washed through her that Whitmore had not won. The stranger moved through the crowd toward the front of the room, pulling a leather wallet from inside his vest. She watched in amazement as he counted out 50 $100 bills, placing them carefully in Garrett's greedy palm. That much cash suggested either supreme foolishness or connections to something more than honest cowboy work. Garrett counted the money twice, his fat fingers trembling with satisfaction. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Brennan," the stranger said curtly. "Matthew Brennan." "Well, Mr. Brennan, she is all yours. I have a bill of sale prepared." Garrett pulled a document from his vest pocket, already filled out except for the buyer's name. Adelaide felt bile rise in her throat. A bill of sale, as if she were a horse or a piece of furniture. She watched as Matthew Brennan took the paper, glanced at it briefly, then folded it and tucked it into his own vest pocket. His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Matthew turned to Adelaide and offered his hand to help her down from the platform. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not painful. "Miss Owens," he said quietly. She descended on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye in the saloon following her movement. Thomas still sat in his corner, refusing to look up. She was glad he could not see her face, for she did not trust herself to hide her contempt. "My horse is outside," Matthew said. "Do you have belongings to collect?" Adelaide shook her head. "Everything I own is on my back. Thomas already sold the rest to cover his whiskey debts." Something flickered in Matthew's eyes. Anger, perhaps. But he only nodded. He placed a hand lightly on her lower back, guiding her toward the door. The crowd parted for them, and Adelaide held her breath until they stepped out into the fresh air and sunlight. The main street of Downeyville bustled with afternoon activity. Gold miners in from the hills crowded around the assayer's office. Wagons rattled past bearing supplies from Sacramento. Women in respectable bonnets hurried along the wooden sidewalks, averting their eyes from the scene at the saloon. Everyone in town would know by nightfall what had transpired, if they did not know already. Matthew's horse stood tied at the hitching post, a magnificent bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a white star on his forehead. Nearby waited a gray mare with a gentler disposition, evident in her relaxed stance. Matthew untied both horses and handed Adelaide the mare's reins. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." Adelaide had grown up in the saddle, though it had been months since her brothers sold their horses to pay gambling debts. "Good. We have a ways to go before dark." Adelaide mounted the mare, adjusting her skirts as modestly as possible. Her mind raced with questions, but she found her voice stuck somewhere between her throat and her chest. Matthew swung up onto his bay with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life on horseback. He turned the horse toward the road leading north out of town. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, leaving Downeyville behind as the road climbed into the pine-forested hills. The air grew cooler and cleaner, scented with resin and wildflowers. Adelaide tried to form a plan, tried to think beyond the next moment, but her thoughts scattered like startled quail. This man owned her now, by law, if not by any moral right. He had paid $5,000 for her. What would he expect in return? Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Matthew guided his horse off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound between towering ponderosa pines. Adelaide followed, her heart hammering. After another 15 minutes, they emerged into a small clearing where a creek chattered over smooth stones. Matthew dismounted and began unsaddling his horse. "We will camp here tonight," he said. "There is a ranch another day's ride north, where I work sometimes. We will reach it tomorrow afternoon." Adelaide slid down from the mare, her legs stiff from the ride. She watched as Matthew efficiently established camp, hobbling the horses near good grass, gathering wood for a fire, filling a coffee pot from the creek. His movements were economical and practiced. He built a fire as the evening shadows lengthened, then produced a cloth-wrapped package from his saddlebags containing jerky and hard biscuits. They ate in continued silence. Adelaide's nerves stretched tighter with each passing moment. Finally, she could bear it no longer. "Why did you buy me?" The words came out more forcefully than she intended. Matthew looked up from the fire, his gray eyes reflecting the flames. "Because the alternative was watching Henry Whitmore take you home, and I know what kind of man he is." "And what kind of man are you?" He considered the question seriously. "The kind who does not believe in owning people." Adelaide's breath caught. "Then why pay $5,000 for me?" Matthew reached into his vest and pulled out the bill of sale Garrett had given him. In one smooth motion, he tossed it into the fire. The paper caught immediately, curling and blackening as the flames consumed it. "Because now no one owns you," he said quietly. Adelaide stared at the burning paper, unable to comprehend what she was witnessing. "I do not understand. You just destroyed the only proof of your purchase. I could run away, and you would have no legal recourse." "I know. You spent $5,000 just to burn a piece of paper? I spent $5,000 to prevent you from becoming Henry Whitmore's slave, The paper was worthless to me. Matthew poured coffee into 2 tin cups and offered her one. You are free, Miss Owens. In the morning, you can ride back to Downeyville if you choose. Or I can guide you to Sacramento where you might find work. Or you can come with me to the Rocking J Ranch, where they need a cook and housekeeper. The pay is $25 a month plus room and board. The work is honest, and the owners are decent people. The choice is yours. Adelaide took the coffee with trembling hands. Tears blurred her vision, tears she had refused to shed on the auction block, now falling freely. Why would you do this? You do not know me. I know enough. Matthew's voice was gentle. I know you stood up there with your head high, when most women would have been weeping. I know your brother is a fool, and you deserve better than being sold like livestock. And I know what it feels like to have no choices. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, studying him across the fire. What is your story, Matthew Brennan? He smiled slightly, the first smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles and revealing a gentleness that had been hidden beneath his stern exterior. That is a long tale, better saved for when we know each other better. But I will tell you this much. I grew up in Texas, and when I was 17, my family lost everything to a crooked banker. I understand what it means to be trapped by another person's greed and stupidity. They sat in silence for a time, drinking the bitter coffee and listening to the night sounds of the forest. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness. The creek sang its endless song. Adelaide felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of fear beginning to unravel. The ranch, she said finally. Tell me about it. The Rocking J is owned by Jack and Martha Jefferson. They have been working that land for 20 years, built it up from nothing. They have about 200 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, a good vegetable garden. Their last cook left to get married in the spring, and Martha has been trying to manage the house and help Jack with the ranch work. She is not young anymore, and it is wearing her down. When I was there last month, she mentioned needing help. $25 a month is fair wage for cooking and keeping house for the ranch hands. There are usually 5 or 6 men working the place, depending on the season. And you, what do you do there? I break horses mostly. I move around between several ranches in these parts, wherever I am needed. I am good with difficult animals, the ones other men cannot handle. Adelaide could believe that. There was something calm and steady about Matthew Brennan, a quiet strength that would appeal to frightened horses and desperate women alike. I do not want to go back to Downeyville, she said. There is nothing for me there but shame and a brother I can barely stand to look at. But I do not have money for Sacramento, and I would not know anyone there. Then come to the Rocking J, work for the Jeffersons, earn your wages, build a new life. No one will own you, and no one will have claim on your work except in fair exchange for fair pay. It was more than she had dared hope for when she stood on that auction block. Adelaide looked at the man who had given her back her freedom and felt something shift in her heart. Gratitude certainly, but also curiosity and the first stirrings of something she could not yet name. Thank you, she whispered. I will go with you to the ranch. Matthew nodded. You can sleep near the fire. I will keep watch for a while. Make sure we have no unwelcome visitors. You think someone might follow us? Garrett is not a man who likes being denied. He might have second thoughts about our transaction, especially if he realizes I burned the bill of sale. And your brother might develop a conscience. Adelaide doubted very much that Thomas possessed a conscience, but she appreciated Matthew's caution. She wrapped herself in a blanket Matthew provided and lay down near the warmth of the fire. The ground was hard beneath her, and the sounds of the forest were different from the familiar creaks of her farmhouse. But exhaustion pulled her toward sleep. Her last waking thought was of Matthew Brennan, sitting with his back against a tree trunk, rifle across his knees, keeping watch through the night so she could rest safely. No man had protected her since her father died. She had forgotten what it felt like to be sheltered, rather than trapped. Morning came with bird song and the smell of coffee. Adelaide woke to find Matthew already up, the fire rebuilt, and breakfast of bacon and beans warming in a small skillet. He handed her a tin plate without comment, and they ate while the horses grazed nearby. The awkwardness of the previous night had eased somewhat, replaced by a tentative companionship. They broke camp efficiently and were on the trail as the sun climbed above the eastern peaks. The ride north took them through some of the most beautiful country Adelaide had ever seen. The Sierra Nevada mountains rose around them in layers of blue and purple, their slopes covered with dense forests of pine and fir. Wildflowers bloomed in the meadows they crossed, lupine and Indian paintbrush, columbine and wild roses. Hawks circled overhead, and once they spotted a black bear ambling through the trees at a safe distance. Matthew proved to be better company on the trail than she had expected. He pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the region, how the gold rush had transformed these mountains, how the railroad had pushed through just 8 years ago in 1870, how the native peoples who had lived here for thousands of years were being pushed out by settlers and miners. He spoke with a mixture of wonder and sadness, clearly appreciating the beauty of the land while recognizing the cost of conquest. "Do you ever think about settling down?" Adelaide asked as they paused to water the horses at a stream. "Finding a place of your own instead of wandering between ranches?" Matthew looked out across the valley spread below them, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes, but land costs money, and building a ranch from nothing takes more than just hard work. It takes capital I do not have. So I work where I am needed, save what I can, and maybe someday I will have enough." $5,000 would have been a good start, Adelaide pointed out. He turned to her with that slight smile again. $5,000 was better spent giving you a choice. Besides, money does not mean much if you cannot live with yourself. They rode on, and Adelaide found herself watching Matthew when she thought he was not looking. He sat his horse with unconscious grace, moving with the animal rather than against it. His hands on the reins were gentle but confident. When they passed other travelers on the road, he greeted them politely but kept moving, not inviting conversation. He seemed like a man accustomed to solitude, but not hostile to company. It was late afternoon when they crested a rise, and Matthew pointed to a valley below. There, the rocking J. Adelaide followed his gesture and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a green valley where a river curved through grassland. The main ranch house was a sturdy structure of logs and stone, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Nearby stood a barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the meadows, and she could see tiny figures moving between the buildings, going about their work. "It is beautiful," Adelaide breathed. "The Jeffersons have worked hard to build it. You will like them, I think." They descended the slope toward the ranch, and as they drew closer, a woman emerged from the main house. She was perhaps 50 years old, gray-haired and sturdy, wearing a practical dress and apron. When she recognized Matthew, her weathered face broke into a smile. "Matthew Brennan, you old wanderer. I thought you had forgotten about us." Matthew dismounted and embraced the woman warmly. "Martha Jefferson, you know I could never forget your cooking, though I hear you have been working too hard." "Oh, hush, who told you that?" But Martha's eyes had already found Adelaide, curiosity and caution mixing in her expression. "Martha, this is Adelaide Owens. Adelaide, Martha Jefferson, the finest ranch woman in the Sierras and possibly the entire West." Adelaide dismounted, suddenly nervous. Everything depended on Martha's reaction, on whether she would accept a woman with Adelaide's story. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Jefferson." Martha's keen eyes swept over Adelaide, missing nothing. "Owens, any relation to Thomas Owens from down Downeyville way?" Adelaide's heart sank. "My brother." Martha's expression revealed nothing. "That boy is a fool with cards and whiskey." "Yes, madam, he is." "Come inside, both of you. Jack is out checking the fence line on the north pasture, but he will be back by supper. You look worn out, girl, and I expect there is a story here worth hearing." Martha led them into the ranch house, and Adelaide found herself in a large, comfortable kitchen that smelled of bread and herbs. The room was spotlessly clean, but lived in, with copper pots hanging from the rafters and dried flowers in jars on the windowsills. A large table dominated the center of the room, and Martha gestured for them to sit while she poured coffee. Matthew told the story plainly, sparing none of the ugly details. Adelaide was grateful he did not try to soften the truth or make it sound less shameful than it was. Martha listened without interrupting, her face growing sterner as the tale unfolded. When Matthew finished, Martha set down her coffee cup and looked directly at Adelaide. "So he bought your freedom and burned the paper. That is the most ridiculous and honorable thing I ever heard." "I am not looking for charity, Mrs. Jefferson," Adelaide said quickly. "Matthew said you needed a cook and housekeeper. I can work. I am strong and capable, and I have been managing a household since my mother died. I can cook for a crew of men, do laundry, clean, preserve food, tend a garden. I can also sew and mend, and I know basic doctoring for injuries and illness. I will earn my wages." Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. $25 a month, room and board. You will have a room off the kitchen here in the main house. Meals for the ranch hands are served 3 times a day, breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at sunset. You will work with me initially until you know how things run here. Laundry is Mondays and Thursdays. Baking is Tuesdays. Wednesdays and Fridays. The garden needs tending daily. Think you can handle it? Relief flooded through Adelaide. Yes, madam, I can handle it. Good, because I am exhausted from trying to do it all myself. Martha's stern expression softened. What happened to you was not your fault, girl. Your brother is a weak fool, but you do not have to carry his shame. Here at the Rocking J, you will be judged on your work and your character, nothing else. Tears pricked Adelaide's eyes again. Thank you, Mrs. Jefferson. Call me Martha. Now, let me show you to your room, and then you can help me with supper. We have 6 hands right now, plus Jack, plus Matthew if he is staying, and they all eat like starving wolves. The room Martha showed her was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was the first space that had been entirely her own in years. Adelaide set down her few belongings and took a moment to collect herself, steadying her breathing and pushing down the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She returned to the kitchen to find Martha and Matthew in quiet conversation. They broke off when she entered, but Adelaide caught Martha giving Matthew an approving nod. Whatever they had been discussing, it seemed Martha approved. Can you make biscuits? Martha asked. Yes. Then start a batch while I work on this roast. Matthew, make yourself useful and peel those potatoes. They worked together in companionable silence, and Adelaide found peace in the familiar rhythms of cooking. Her hands knew what to do, and the work calmed her racing thoughts. Martha was an efficient cook who wasted no motion, and Adelaide quickly adapted to her methods. Matthew proved surprisingly handy with a knife, peeling potatoes with the same competence he brought to everything else. The ranch hands began arriving as the sun touched the horizon. They cleaned up at the pump outside, then filed into the kitchen, talking and joking among themselves. They fell silent when they saw Adelaide, curiosity plain on their weathered faces. Boys, this is Adelaide Owens, Martha announced. She is our new cook and housekeeper. You will treat her with respect or answer to me and Jack. Understood? A chorus of, yes, madam, answered her. The men were a mixed bunch, 2 young cowboys who could not have been more than 20, a grizzled older man who introduced himself as Frank and served as foreman, a quiet Mexican vaquero named Carlos, and twin brothers in their 30s named Pete and Paul, who finished each other's sentences. They were polite but clearly starving, their eyes on the food rather than on Adelaide, which suited her fine. Jack Jefferson arrived just as Martha was setting the food on the table. He was a tall, lean man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes, moving with the careful gait of someone whose joints ached from decades of hard work. Matthew stood to shake his hand, and the 2 men exchanged the easy greeting of old friends. Heard you brought us a cook, Jack said, his eyes twinkling. About time. Martha was ready to murder someone if she had to make one more pot of beans. I was not, Martha protested, but she was smiling. Dinner was lively, with the men sharing stories of the day's work, and Martha and Jack asking Matthew about his travels since they had last seen him. Adelaide mostly listened, getting a sense of the ranch's rhythms and the relationships between the people here. It felt different from the tense, silent meals she had shared with Thomas over the past year. Here was warmth and laughter, the comfortable banter of people who worked together toward common goals. After dinner, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse while Adelaide and Martha cleaned up. Jack and Matthew sat on the front porch, talking quietly in the gathering darkness. Through the open window, Adelaide could hear the low murmur of their voices, but not the words. He is a good man, Martha said, following Adelaide's gaze. Matthew, I mean. He does not talk about his past much, but I know he has seen hard times, makes him understand other people's troubles better than most. He saved me, Adelaide said softly. I do not know if I can ever repay that. He would not want repayment. That is not how Matthew operates, but you could do worse than to have him as a friend. Martha dried the last plate and hung up her apron. You must be exhausted. Why do not you turn in? I will show you the morning routine tomorrow. Adelaide gratefully accepted the dismissal and retreated to her small room. She could hear Martha join the men on the porch, their conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. She undressed to her chemise and lay down on the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling. 2 days ago, she had been living in fear, watching her brother drink away what little they had left. Yesterday she had stood on an auction block, sold like property. Today she had work, a room of her own, and her freedom. The change was so dramatic she could barely process it. And at the center of all this change was Matthew Brennan, the mysterious cowboy who had spent a fortune to burn a piece of paper. Adelaide did not understand him, but she found herself wanting to. There was something in his gray eyes that called to her, a depth of character she had rarely encountered. He had given her freedom without expecting anything in return, and that generosity left her feeling both grateful and strangely hollow. Part of her wished he had wanted something from her, because then at least she would know how to respond. His selflessness left her adrift, unsure how to feel or what to do next. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone finally safe after too long in danger. Adelaide woke before dawn to the sound of Martha moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Martha already starting the fire in the big cook stove. "Morning," Martha greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months." "Good. Now, let me show you how we do things here." The days developed a rhythm. Adelaide rose before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The men ate quickly and headed out to their various tasks, mending fences, moving cattle, breaking horses, maintaining equipment. Adelaide and Martha spent the mornings on household tasks, cleaning, laundry, tending the vegetable garden, preserving food, mending clothes. Midday they prepared dinner, the largest meal of the day. Afternoons were for baking and preparing supper, along with whatever other work needed doing. It was hard work, harder than Adelaide had worked even on her own farm, but it was satisfying in a way her life in Downieville had not been for a long time. She fell into bed exhausted each night and woke with purpose each morning. Martha was a demanding teacher, but a fair one, and Adelaide learned quickly. Matthew stayed at the ranch, working with Jack to break a string of wild horses they had bought cheap from a rancher who could not handle them. Adelaide watched him sometimes from the kitchen window, seeing how he worked with the frightened animals. He never forced, never fought. Instead, he seemed to communicate with the horses in some language beyond words, his movements calm and confident until even the most skittish animal began to trust him. "He has a gift," Jack remarked one evening at supper, noticing Adelaide watching Matthew work with a particularly difficult mare. "I have seen a lot of horse breakers in my time, but Matthew is special. The horses sense something in him, some quality that makes them feel safe." Adelaide thought she understood what the horses sensed. She felt it too. That bedrock steadiness, that calm strength that never demanded but always offered. She found herself thinking about Matthew more than she should. He was never inappropriate, never presumed on what he had done for her. He treated her with the same quiet respect he showed everyone else. Yet Adelaide caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful, as if he were trying to solve some puzzle. 3 weeks after her arrival at the Rocking J, Matthew announced he would be leaving the next day. "There is a ranch about 50 miles east that needs help with their autumn roundup," he explained over supper. "The pay is good, and they are expecting me." Adelaide felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the way his quiet strength balanced the more boisterous energy of the other ranch hands. "How long will you be gone?" "A month, maybe 2, depending on how the work goes and whether the weather holds." That night, after the dishes were done and Martha had retired, Adelaide found Matthew on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. "May I join you?" she asked. "Of course." She sat beside him on the porch step, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I wanted to thank you again," Adelaide finally said, "for everything you did. Not just buying my freedom, but bringing me here, giving me a chance at a new life. I do not think I will ever be able to repay you." "There is no debt," Matthew said firmly. "What I did because it was right, because you deserve better than what your brother dealt you. Still, you could have used that money for your own dreams. You said you wanted land of your own someday." Matthew was quiet for a moment. "I still have my dreams. Money can be earned again. But I could not have lived with myself if I had let Whitmore buy you. Some things matter more than money." Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest. She turned to look at him, studying his profile in the starlight. "Why did you never marry, Matthew? A man like you, I would think women would be lining up." He smiled slightly. "A wandering cowboy with no land and no prospects? I doubt women are lining up. Besides, I have not met anyone who made me want to stop wandering. Until recently, her breath caught. Recently? Matthew turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. Adelaide, I need to be honest with you. When I saw you on that auction block, something in me knew I could not walk away. And these past weeks watching you work and laugh and build a new life here, I find myself not wanting to leave tomorrow. But I do not want you to feel obligated to me because of what I did. Your freedom means nothing if you do not feel free to make your own choices. Adelaide's heart hammered in her chest. And if I chose you, would that be freedom or obligation? That depends on why you chose. She took a breath, gathering her courage. I choose you because you are kind, because you see people as they are, not as what you want them to be, because you gave me back myself when I thought I had lost everything, because when I think about you leaving tomorrow, my chest feels tight and the world seems a little less bright. Is that freedom or obligation? Matthew reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he cupped her face gently in his calloused palm. That sounds like freedom to me. He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. Adelaide melted into it, her hands finding his shoulders, anchoring herself against the rush of emotion. The kiss tasted of coffee and promise, of new beginnings and careful hope. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Matthew rested his forehead against hers. I am still leaving tomorrow. The work is promised and I keep my word, but I will come back as soon as I can. And when I do, if you still feel the same, we can talk about the future. I will feel the same, Adelaide said with certainty. 2 months will not change my heart. 2 months will give you time to be sure, to know that what you feel is not just gratitude. She wanted to argue, to insist she knew her own mind, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. She had been through so much in such a short time. Perhaps space and time would help her understand her own feelings more clearly. Then I will wait, she said, and you will come back. I will come back, he promised. They sat together on the porch until the night grew cold, talking about everything and nothing. Matthew told her more about his childhood in Texas, about losing his family's ranch and heading west to make his own way. Adelaide shared memories of her parents, of growing up in the shadow of the gold rush, of the slow heartbreak of watching her brothers destroy himself with drink and gambling. By the time they said goodnight, Adelaide felt as if she had known Matthew Brennan her entire life. He was no longer a mysterious stranger, but a man she was beginning to understand and care for deeply. Morning came too quickly. Adelaide helped Martha prepare breakfast, her movements automatic, while her mind stayed focused on Matthew's impending departure. The ranch hands ate quickly and headed out, leaving just the family and Matthew at the table. You are always welcome here, Jack told Matthew as they finished eating. And I expect you back before winter sets in. We will need help moving the herd to lower pasture. I will be here, Matthew promised. He saddled his bay gelding and prepared for the journey. Adelaide walked with him to where the horse waited, aware of Martha and Jack tactfully staying on the porch to give them privacy. 2 months, Matthew said, checking his saddle cinch one final time. 2 months, Adelaide agreed. I will be here. He kissed her once more, quick and hard, then swung up into the saddle. Adelaide watched him ride away, her hand raised in farewell, until he disappeared over the rise. Even after he was gone, she stood staring at the empty road, her heart full of tangled emotions. Martha's hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present. That is a good man riding away, and he will come back. How can you be so sure? Because of the way he looks at you, like you are water in the desert and stars in the darkness. A man does not look at a woman that way and then forget about her. Adelaide hoped Martha was right. She returned to the house and threw herself into work, trying not to count the days but counting them anyway. The seasons began their slow turn toward autumn. The days remained warm, but the nights grew cooler. The cottonwoods along the river started showing hints of gold. Adelaide fell into the rhythms of ranch life, growing closer to Martha and Jack, earning the respect of the ranch hands through her cooking and her willingness to work hard. She saved her wages religiously, storing the money in a tin box under her bed. It was not much, but it was hers, earned through her own labor. The feeling of independence was sweeter than she had imagined. Letters arrived from Matthew, carried by travelers passing through. They were not long or flowery, but they revealed a thoughtful man with a dry sense of humor and an eye for detail. He wrote about the work, about the country he traveled through, about small moments that caught his attention. An eagle hunting at dawn, a sudden thunderstorm that turned the desert into a garden of wildflowers, an old prospector who shared his campfire and told stories of the early gold rush days. Adelaide wrote back, telling him about life at the ranch, about the baby calf she had helped nurse back to health, about learning to make Martha's famous apple pie, about the time Pete accidentally set his hat on fire while trying to light a lantern. She found herself pouring her thoughts onto paper more easily than she had ever spoken them aloud. 6 weeks into Matthew's absence, trouble arrived in the form of her brother. Thomas rode up to the ranch on a Thursday afternoon, looking haggard and desperate. Adelaide was in the garden picking tomatoes when she heard the horse. She looked up to see her brother dismounting near the house, and her stomach clenched with dread. Martha emerged from the house, her expression stern. "Thomas Owens, what brings you here?" "I need to speak with my sister," Thomas said, his eyes finding Adelaide. Adelaide set down her basket and walked slowly toward the house, dread warring with anger in her chest. She had not seen or heard from Thomas since the auction. Part of her had hoped never to see him again. "What do you want?" she asked coldly. Thomas flinched at her tone. He looked terrible, his clothes dirty and his face unshaven. "Adelaide, I am so sorry. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am trying to make things right. I have been sober for 3 weeks. I got a job at the mill in Downeyville, and I am working to pay back some of my debts. I just wanted you to know that I am trying to be better." "You sold me," Adelaide said flatly. "You let Samuel Garrett put me on an auction block like an animal because you could not control your gambling. What do you want from me, Thomas? Absolution? I cannot give you that." "I do not expect forgiveness," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I just needed you to know I am ashamed of what I did. You deserved so much better than me for a brother. Mother and father would have been horrified." "They would have," Adelaide agreed, her voice hard. "They trusted you to take care of the family, and you destroyed everything they built." Thomas nodded miserably. "I know. I am not asking you to come back or to give me another chance. I just wanted to see that you were all right, and to tell you that I am trying to change. That is all." Adelaide studied her brother, trying to find some remnant of the boy she had grown up with, the brother who had once protected her from bullies and taught her to fish in the creek behind their house. That boy seemed long gone, replaced by this broken man who reeked of failure and regret. "I am more than all right," she said finally. "I have honest work and good people around me. I have my freedom and my self-respect. You sold me to Garrett, but Matthew Brennan bought me and set me free. He gave me back everything you tried to take away." "Then I owe him a debt I can never repay," Thomas said softly. "I am glad you are safe, Adelaide. That is all I needed to know." He turned to leave, but Adelaide found herself calling after him. "Thomas!" He stopped, looking back with wary hope. "If you truly are sober, if you are truly trying to change, then keep doing it. Not for me, but for yourself, for mother and father's memory. Maybe someday, if you prove you have changed, we can speak again, but not now. The wound is too fresh." Thomas nodded, tears streaking his dusty face. "I understand. Goodbye, Adelaide." She watched him ride away, her emotions in turmoil. Martha came to stand beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "That could not have been easy," Martha said gently. "It was not, but it needed to happen, I suppose. I could not move forward while still carrying so much anger." Adelaide took a shaky breath. "Do you think people can really change?" "Some can," Martha said, "if they truly want to, and if they are willing to do the hard work. Your brother may or may not succeed. That is on him, not you. You do not owe him anything, Adelaide. Not your forgiveness, not your trust, not your presence in his life. If he truly changes, time will prove it. Until then, you focus on building your own future." Adelaide nodded, taking comfort in Martha's practical wisdom. She returned to her gardening, using the physical work to settle her churning thoughts. By evening, she had processed the encounter enough to set it aside. Thomas was part of her past. Matthew and the life she was building here were her future. The weeks continued their march toward autumn. The garden produced its bounty, and Adelaide spent long hours helping Martha preserve vegetables and fruits for winter. They made pickles and relishes, dried beans and herbs, canned tomatoes and peaches. The root cellar filled with potatoes, onions, carrots, and squash. Adelaide took pride in the work, knowing she was helping ensure the ranch would eat well through the cold months ahead. 8 weeks after Matthew's departure, on a crisp September morning, when the aspens were turning gold, Adelaide looked up from kneading bread to see a familiar rider approaching the ranch. Her heart leaped into her throat. She barely remembered to wash the flour off her hands before rushing out to meet him. Matthew dismounted as she approached, his face breaking into a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. Adelaide did not give herself time to think or second-guess. She threw herself into his arms, and he caught her easily, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. "You came back," she said unnecessarily, laughing and crying at once. "I promised I would." He set her down, but did not let her go, his arms tight around her. 2 months felt like 2 years. It felt like forever, Adelaide agreed. They stood there, holding each other, until a polite cough from the porch reminded them they had an audience. Martha stood there grinning, while Jack tried and failed to hide his smile. "Well, do not just stand there," Martha called. "Bring that man inside and feed him. He looks half-starved." Dinner was a celebration. The ranch hands welcomed Matthew back with genuine pleasure, and the meal was full of stories and laughter. Adelaide could barely eat, too aware of Matthew sitting beside her, his knee occasionally brushing hers under the table. After the meal, after the dishes were done and the ranch hands had retreated to the bunkhouse, Adelaide and Matthew walked down to the river. The evening was cool and clear, the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. They sat on the riverbank, shoulders touching, listening to the water flow past. "I thought about you every day," Matthew said quietly. "Wondered if you were well, if you were happy, if you had changed your mind about me." "I never changed my mind," Adelaide assured him. "I only became more certain. These 2 months showed me that what I feel is not gratitude or obligation. It is something much deeper." Matthew took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I love you, Adelaide. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you on that auction block, standing there so brave and proud despite everything. These months away only made me more certain that I want to spend my life with you." Adelaide felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too. I love your kindness and your strength. I love how you see the best in people and how you treat everyone with respect. I love that you gave me my freedom and then let me choose you. I choose you, Matthew. I will always choose you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Adelaide responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Matthew said. "I know I do not have much to offer. I am still just a wandering cowboy with no land of my own, but I promise I will work hard and build a future for us. I will give you the life you deserve." "You already have," Adelaide said. "You gave me my life back. Everything else we can build together. Yes, Matthew Brennan, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, then spent the next hour making plans. They would marry soon, before winter set in. Matthew had been saving his wages too, and combined with Adelaide's savings, they had enough to make a start. Jack had mentioned he knew of land available further north, good grazing land with water rights. It would take time to build it into a working ranch, but they were both willing to work. When they returned to the house, Martha took one look at their faces and burst into tears of joy. "Finally! I thought you two would never stop dancing around each other." "We want to marry before winter," Matthew said, "if you and Jack will stand witness." "We would be honored," Jack said, shaking Matthew's hand firmly. "You are both good people, and you deserve happiness." The next week was a flurry of preparations. Adelaide had nothing fancy to wear, but Martha helped her alter one of her own old dresses, a dark blue silk that Martha had worn to church years ago. With some taking in and adjusting, it fit Adelaide perfectly. She made a crown of late-season wildflowers to wear in her hair. Matthew borrowed a suit from Jack, and though it was slightly too short in the sleeves, he looked handsome in it. The ranch hands pitched in to help prepare a wedding feast, and even contributed to a collection to buy the couple a set of fine dishes as a wedding present. They were married on a sunny October afternoon in the parlor of the ranch house, with Jack and Martha standing witness, and the ranch hands crowded into the room. The local preacher from the nearest town, a kindly man who made monthly circuits to serve the scattered ranches, performed the ceremony. When Matthew kissed his bride, the ranch hands cheered. Adelaide felt joy bubble up inside her, pure and bright. 3 months ago, she had stood on an auction block, her future looking bleak and terrifying. Now she stood beside the man she loved, surrounded by friends, embarking on a new life she had chosen freely. The wedding feast was simple but joyful. Roast beef and potatoes, fresh bread, canned vegetables from the summer garden, and a cake Martha had secretly been working on for days. They ate and drank and told stories late into the evening. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the barn, with Adelaide passed from partner to partner, as all the ranch hands took turns spinning her around the floor. Finally, as the moon rose high overhead, Matthew and Adelaide retreated to the small cabin Jack had offered them, a sturdy building about a quarter-mile from the main house that had once served as temporary housing during roundup season. The ranch hands had fixed it up as their wedding gift, patching the roof, cleaning thoroughly, even hanging curtains that Frank's sister had sewn. Inside, a fire crackled in the small fireplace. Adelaide stood in the center of the one-room cabin, suddenly nervous. Matthew closed the door behind them and turned to face her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, seeming to sense her nerves. "Yes, just overwhelmed by how much has changed. A few months ago, I was terrified and alone. Now, I am married to the best man I have ever known, and I do not quite know how to process it all." Matthew crossed the room and took her hands. "We have the rest of our lives to figure it out together. There is no rush." He kissed her softly, and Adelaide relaxed into his arms. What followed was tender and careful, Matthew taking his time to ensure her comfort and pleasure. Adelaide had been nervous about the wedding night, but Matthew's gentleness and clear love for her made it beautiful rather than frightening. They explored each other slowly, learning what brought pleasure and comfort, building intimacy along with passion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Adelaide's head on Matthew's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. Matthew kissed the top of her head. "Neither did I, but here we are." "Here we are," Adelaide agreed, smiling in the darkness. They spent a week in the small cabin, establishing their life together. Matthew continued working at the Rocking J, and Adelaide returned to her duties in the main house kitchen, though Martha insisted on calling her Mrs. Brennan, now with a teasing smile. The ranch hands treated the newlyweds with good-natured ribbing, but also genuine happiness for them. As autumn deepened into early winter, Matthew and Jack made a trip north to look at the land Jack had mentioned. They returned a week later with news. 240 acres with good grass, a creek running through it, and timber enough to build with. The price was steep but fair. Between Matthew's savings, Adelaide's carefully hoarded wages, and a loan from Jack, they could afford it. "We would be fools not to take it," Matthew told Adelaide that night. "It is good land, Adelaide. With work, we could build something real there." "Then we take it," Adelaide said without hesitation. "We build our ranch and our life together." They finalized the purchase in early December. The land was theirs. They spent the winter at the Rocking J, with Matthew working to repay Jack's loan, and Adelaide continuing to help Martha with the household. But every spare moment, they planned their future, the ranch house they would build, the livestock they would raise, the garden Adelaide would plant, the horses Matthew would breed. Spring came, and with it, the start of their new life. With help from Jack and the ranch hands, they built a small cabin on their land, just one room and a loft to start, but solid and tight against the weather. They dug a well and built a corral. Matthew bought 6 good brood mares and a young stallion with excellent bloodlines. Adelaide planted a garden, and chickens arrived in crates from Sacramento. The work was brutal from sunup to sundown every day, but it was their work, on their land, building their future. Adelaide had never been so tired or so fulfilled. At night, she and Matthew would collapse into bed, exhausted but content, planning the next day's tasks and dreaming about the years ahead. Their first summer on the ranch, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. Matthew was overjoyed, though also immediately anxious about her doing too much heavy work. Adelaide assured him she was strong and healthy, though she did appreciate his help with tasks that became more difficult as her belly swelled. Their son was born in February of 1880, delivered with Martha's experienced help. They named him James, after Adelaide's father. He was healthy and loud, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Matthew held his son with such tenderness and awe that Adelaide fell in love with him all over again. Parenthood brought new challenges. The ranch work could not stop for a baby, so Adelaide learned to manage household tasks, with an infant strapped to her back. Matthew took on even more work, determined to provide for his growing family. They were exhausted and overwhelmed, but also deeply happy. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Matthew's reputation as a horse breaker brought buyers from across the territory. Adelaide's garden expanded each year, and she began selling eggs and preserves in town. They saved every penny, reinvesting in the ranch. After 2 years, they were able to expand the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. Their daughter Sarah was born in 1882, and a second son, Thomas, in 1884. Adelaide had hesitated over that name, but Matthew had encouraged it. "He is not your brother," Matthew had said gently. "He is our son, and he deserves his own identity. Besides, the name belonged to your father, too. Maybe our Thomas will honor it better." Adelaide agreed, and their Thomas proved to be a sweet-natured child who followed his father everywhere, determined to learn everything about horses and ranching. The years passed in a blur of work and love, challenges and triumphs. There were hard times, a drought that killed half their herd in 1885, a winter so brutal in 1887 that they nearly lost everything, the heartbreak when Adelaide miscarried in 1888. But there were good times too. The first time they turned a profit, the year their eldest son won the horse race at the county fair, the evening Matthew surprised her with a new dress he had ordered from a catalog, the simple joy of sitting on their porch watching the sunset with his arm around her. In 1890, they received word that Thomas Owens had died of pneumonia. Adelaide traveled to Downieville for the funeral, bringing Matthew and their children. Her brother had indeed changed in his final years, sober and working steadily at the mill. He had never remarried or had children of his own. He left a simple will that gave his small savings to Adelaide, along with a letter. Adelaide read it privately, tears streaming down her face. Thomas had written about his regrets, his pride in her accomplishments, his gratitude that she had survived and thrived despite what he had done to her. He asked for forgiveness he knew he did not deserve, and expressed hope that she had found happiness. "I did find happiness," Adelaide told Matthew that night, letting him hold her as she grieved for the brother she had lost long before his actual death. "I found it with you, despite everything Thomas did. I hope he found some peace before the end." From what the mill foreman said, he was respected in his final years. "That counts for something," Matthew said. "People can change, even when the cost of that change is high." They used Thomas's small inheritance to buy more breeding stock, building the ranch's reputation further. By 1895, the Brennan Ranch was one of the most successful horse operations in the territory. Their children were growing. James at 15 was nearly as tall as his father and showed promise of being an excellent horseman himself. Sarah at 13 had her mother's organizational skills and helped manage the household. Young Thomas at 11 was still following his father around, absorbing everything he could about the business. In 1899, as the old century drew to a close, Adelaide and Matthew took a rare evening to themselves. The children were all occupied with their own tasks, and the evening was mild and beautiful. They rode up to a hilltop on their property that overlooked the ranch spread below them. 20 years, Adelaide said softly, leaning back against Matthew as they sat, watching the sun set. 20 years since you walked into that saloon and changed my life. "Best $5,000 I ever spent," Matthew said, his arms tight around her. Adelaide laughed. "You never did tell me where you got that money. You were just a wandering cowboy. How did you have $5,000? Matthew was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather left me an inheritance when he died. It was supposed to be my nest egg, my start on a ranch of my own. I had been saving it for years, waiting for the right opportunity." Adelaide twisted to look at him, shocked. "You spent your inheritance on me? Matthew, that was your dream." "No," he said firmly. "You were my dream. I just did not know it until I saw you. The money was just money. You were everything." Tears filled Adelaide's eyes. After 20 years of marriage, he could still make her cry with his simple declarations of love. "I love you so much. I love you too. And look what we built together, Adelaide. This ranch, our family, our life. This is worth more than any amount of money. I have no regrets." "Neither do I," Adelaide said. "Well, except maybe that we did not meet sooner. We met when we were supposed to meet, not a moment earlier or later than we needed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge overhead. Below them, lamplight glowed in the windows of their home. Their children were safe and healthy. The ranch was thriving. They had built something lasting and good out of what had begun as the darkest moment of Adelaide's life. "What do you think the new century will bring?" Adelaide asked. More of the same, I hope. Hard work, good family, the satisfaction of building something with our own hands. Maybe grandchildren before too long. James has been eyeing the blacksmith's daughter in town. Adelaide smiled. Sarah has been receiving letters from that young teacher who came through last fall. And Thomas keeps talking about wanting to start a breeding program for quarter horses. The world will change, Matthew said, but as long as we have each other and our family, we will be all right. Yes, Adelaide agreed. We will be more than all right. We will be happy. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night wind whispered through the pines, Adelaide reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been sold like property, stripped of dignity and choice. But Matthew Brennan had given her back her freedom, and in doing so, had given her the chance to choose love. She had chosen him freely and fully, and he had chosen her right back. Together, they had built a life richer than she had ever imagined possible. The years continued their steady march forward. Their children grew and made their own choices. James did indeed marry the blacksmith's daughter, a capable woman named Emma who fit seamlessly into the ranch operations. They gave Adelaide and Matthew their first grandchildren in 1902, twin boys, rambunctious and full of life. Sarah married her teacher and moved to Sacramento, where she opened a school for young women. She visited often, bringing her own children as they came along. Thomas took over the horse breeding program, developing a line of quarter horses that became famous throughout California. He married a rancher's daughter from Wyoming, a woman who could ride and rope as well as any man. Together they expanded the breeding operation until the Brennan Ranch was shipping horses across the entire West. Adelaide and Matthew gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, letting their children take on more responsibility. They spent their days maintaining the garden, caring for grandchildren, and enjoying the fruits of decades of hard work. Their love had only deepened with time, weathered by shared struggles and strengthened by mutual respect. On a spring morning in 1910, Adelaide woke to find Matthew already up, sitting in the chair by the window and watching the sunrise. He was 62 now, his dark hair silvered and his face lined by sun and wind and laughter. To Adelaide, he was as handsome as the day she met him. "You are up early," she said, joining him by the window. "I wanted to watch the sun rise. It never gets old seeing the light come up over our land." Adelaide took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They had been married 31 years, together for 32. She knew his face better than her own, knew every line and scar and the story behind each one. She knew his moods, his thoughts, his dreams, and he knew hers just as well. "Do you ever think about that day in Downeyville?" she asked. "Wonder what would have happened if you had not been there?" "Sometimes," Matthew admitted. "But I was there. That is what matters. I saw you, and I knew I could not walk away. It was the easiest and hardest decision I ever made." "Easy because it was right, hard because of the cost?" "No, easy because it was right, hard because I did not know if you would ever see me as anything more than the man who bought you. I was terrified you would only ever feel grateful or obligated, never truly free to love me." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "I chose you freely. I have chosen you every day since. I will choose you every day that remains to us." "And I choose you," Matthew said softly. They sat together watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, content in the life they had built and the love they shared. The ranch bustled with activity as their family woke and began the day's work. Grandchildren's laughter drifted up from the yard. The smell of breakfast cooking wafted from the kitchen, where their daughter-in-law Emma was already hard at work. Adelaide leaned her head on Matthew's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her. 3 decades had passed since a desperate woman stood on an auction block and a cowboy spent his dreams to set her free. In that moment of darkness, neither could have imagined this bright future, but love had found a way, as it always does when given room to grow. "No regrets?" Adelaide asked. "Not a single one," Matthew replied. "You?" "Only that we have a finite number of sunrises left to watch together, but we will make the most of every single one." "That we will," Matthew agreed. And they did. For another 15 years, Adelaide and Matthew lived to see their family continue to grow and thrive. They celebrated the births of more grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. They saw their ranch become a landmark in the region, known for quality horses and honest dealings. They watched their children build successful lives, guided by the values of hard work and integrity their parents had instilled. Matthew passed peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 77. Adelaide held his hand as he slipped away, whispering her love and gratitude for a life well lived together. She mourned him deeply, but not desperately, secure in the knowledge that they had made the most of every precious day together. Adelaide lived another 3 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent her final days in the house Matthew had built for her, looking out over the land they had tamed together. When she closed her eyes for the last time, her final thought was of a gray-eyed cowboy who had loved her enough to set her free, and whom she had freely chosen to love in return. Their graves lie side by side on the hilltop overlooking the ranch, under the wide Montana sky. The stones are simple, bearing just their names and the dates of their lives. But their legacy lives on in the descendants who still work the land, in the horses that bear the Brennan brand, and in the story passed down through generations about how love can bloom even from the darkest circumstances. Adelaide Owens had been sold to pay her brother's debts. Matthew Brennan had bought her freedom and given her a choice. She had chosen love, freely and fully, and in doing so had found a happiness beyond anything she could have imagined. Their story became family legend, a testament to courage, sacrifice, and the transformative power of love, freely given and freely received. It was a story that began in darkness but ended in light, a story of two souls who found each other across impossible circumstances and built a life worth living. It was, in the end, a love story for the ages, played out against the wild backdrop of the American West, proof that even in the harshest environments, love could not only survive but flourish.